Please have your welcome, and we will introduce our speakers after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Basma. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those who are overseas. صباح الخير للجميع. مساء الخير للي موجودين بلبنان وبالمنطقة. أو يعني شو بدنا نقول، الله يسلم الجميع. إن شاء الله تكونوا بخير، وإن شاء الله هيدا اليوم يكون يعني فاتحة سلام أطول، وأكيد مش بس لبلادنا، بس كمان لفلسطين وللمنطقة. ما بننسى كمان كل الأسى اللي عم بيكون موجود اليوم ببلدان، من لبنان لفلسطين للسودان لكل بلدان المنطقة. اسمحوا لي غير للإنجليزي لأنه الويبينار بالإنجليزي، ولأنه ضيوفنا كمان عم يتكلموا اللغة الإنجليزية، وهيدي كان لغة الويبينار. So we're pleased to welcome you this afternoon on this webinar on emergency procurement that is concurrent with the ceasefire that started this morning after 2 months and a half, maybe over, of war. And this is a first hope sign that we hope will be sustainable. And while saying that, of course, a thought to every person in Palestine, in Gaza and in Palestine, and for a ceasefire and the reestablishment of a just solution. We planned this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of the war. But the difficult circumstances we've all passed through didn't allow us to organize it. At the time, we were witnessing living lots of atrocities and lots of uncertainties of a war that has induced substantial loss of life, but also serious damages to infrastructure that, according to the World Bank, is around 8.5 billion. And the number, of course, is expected to grow bigger as we start actually surveying the damages in infrastructure, in housing, but also in economic losses. Today we are in a, hopefully in a post war time. Awareness on emergency procurement is still very much needed because it's a need for a clear framework is immense to ensure transparency and accountability, not only in spending the public funds that will be allocated to the emergency, but also of donor funding, of partner funding, of partners funding. So it is very important for us as financial management people, but also as procurement specialists, to get exposed to the global experiences in this field, and to think about what kind of framework we should have in countries like Lebanon, who are subject to recurrent crises. So this makes the framework even much more important to have, and much more needed to be as extensive and as flexible as possible. So this is why I'm very thankful to our esteemed speakers for joining us today. And believe me, these are maybe the best resource persons, key experts on this issue in the world. And we're really very honored and very happy that you are joining us. Caroline, Nicholas, you're today an independent expert in technical assistance in public procurement law and policy, but you have long been working with Lebanon and helping us when we embarked into the MAPS process that led to the drafting of the Public Procurement Law 244, which to which UN Central Model law was the backbone. So welcome again, virtually to Beirut, but hopefully in person in due time. Dr. Majid Baya, I welcome you. You're the practice manager at the procurement in the World Bank, Middle East and North Africa, and also somebody who has had a good grasp of the situation in the country yourself, having visited Beirut, the Institute, and Lebanon not long ago. And I would like also to welcome Ms. Eliza Niewiadomska. She's a senior counsel at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And also with Eliza, we have a long stretch of collaboration because the EBRD has also been supporting the reform of public procurement in Lebanon, the implementation of the national strategy. So as you see and hear, we are really in the presence of sommité, as they say in French, in the area of public procurement. I will leave now the floor to my colleague Basma Abdel Khalib. She is the moderator of the webinar, actually the designer and the moderator of the webinar. And Basma, as you all know her, she's a senior economist and program manager at the Institute, and she has been involved in policy research, in dialogue, in the capacity building efforts that have led, of course, to the whole adventure, let me call it, of public procurement reform in Lebanon from A to Z. And she also coordinated the implementation of the MAP assessment, has been responsible for reporting on the implementation of the national strategy on public procurement reform. Basma is a master's graduate, and she holds many hats at the Institute, and we're very happy that I share with her certification in anti-corruption. So hopefully we will work in the next phases on this area, in particular in public procurement. Thank you all, and the floor is yours, Basma.
Thank you, Lamia, for this introduction, and full of hope and determination for our beloved country, Lebanon. A good day, everyone. I'm really so glad to see all of you, colleagues from institutions we work with, from the public sector, business community, academics, civil society, media, and international partners connected with us this afternoon. This really reflects the interest in the topic of our discussion today on emergency procurement in Lebanon, strategies and techniques in fragile, conflict-affected emergency situation that I have the pleasure to moderate. On a quick logistical note, please note that we will be allocating time for Q&A twice during the webinar. So we will encourage you to write your questions in the chat box anytime. This session is being recorded, and it will be available later on our YouTube channel and on the website. And in case of any connection interruption, please reconnect using the same link you received. If you just allow me to have a few words to frame our discussion today. As you know, the latest World Bank's interim report that was issued 1 month ago preliminarily estimated the damages and losses due to the conflict in Lebanon to $8.5 billion US dollars, 3.4 billion in physical structure, and 5.1 billion as economic losses in key sectors such as health, education, tourism, environment, agriculture, etc. And this also resulted in a slowdown of economic activity that was also and previously affected by the crisis since 2019. But the final damage of the war and the losses are expected to be significantly higher, not to count the needs and the costs associated with the post-war reconstruction, restoration of service delivery, and recovery. This challenging situation in Lebanon is going through requires proactive approaches and fit-for-purpose relief, rehabilitation, and recovery actions to be undertaken by the government and led also by the government, with the support of international community. The international community was already mobilized strongly to support Lebanon for an emergency humanitarian response to the crisis at the occasion of the Paris conference. We have $1 billion US dollars mobilized in humanitarian aid and in support of the Lebanon security forces. So this requires sound management of financial resources and transparent frameworks and mechanisms in place. To go to public procurement specifically, because here where the bulk of the money will be spent, and during the war, we know that there was no martial law declared by the Lebanese government. So from the global experience, we know that in absence of specific rules and procedure in wartime to procure goods and services and works, in the absence of these processes, there might cause a failure of procurement operations, which aggravates the situation more and more. So to have an effective response to crisis and to emergency in meeting the needs of affected communities and ensuring services to citizens, this depends strongly on the effectiveness of the procurement process, on the transparency of operations, on having, if you want to say, mini competition to the extent possible in order to respond to urgent needs. In our current legal framework of procurement, Law 244, as you may know, there are clear articles mentioning that in case of emergency, the use of direct contracting is allowed without going into competition. And also another article says that a procuring entity could award a contract to the bidder without engaging in any competition. So since the beginning of the war, I will list here 3 developments in procurement that have occurred and have been applied. First, the procuring entities started to apply direct contracting more and more to meet emergent needs and deliver services to affected community and citizens like shelter, medical services, fuel, rehabilitation, cleaning streets, etc. But there is a high risk of abuse of using direct contracting, as you all know, because this is prone to corruption, this is prone to fraud and to bribes. So when using direct contracting, which limits which goods and services to go through direct contracting? What's the time span of using direct contracting? Is it limited or unlimited? This is first. The second development is that the Council of Ministers has issued a decree during the wartime, increasing the threshold of using the purchasing by invoice from $5,000 to $15,000, making it easier to procuring entity to procure by invoice without competition. So this is another layer of making things flexible, but with risks of corruption. The third development, the last one, is that the regulatory authority, the Public Procuring Authority, has issued a memo, number 8, reiterating Law 244 in the use of direct contracting in case of emergencies and in allowing also the use of procurement into lots in order to facilitate all the procurement operations. So consequently, there is a need for extra effort to inform, communicate, raise awareness on all these risks affected and associated with emergency procurement in order to minimize the misuse of these scarce resources in the time of war, but also now with the ceasefire in time of reconstruction and rehabilitation. These are the questions we are tapping on today with our distinguished speakers that I will introduce very quickly and then give them the floor to start our discussion. Dr. Majid Al-Bayya, you are welcome. As Lamia introduced you, you are practice manager of procurement for the MENA region in the World Bank. Dr. Bayya has worked extensively on public procurement country reviews, country reform, fiduciary review, and participated in several training on public procurement. He provided training on World Bank procurement and contract management. He held several senior positions in the World Bank in several areas like the MENA region, Europe, and Central Asia and South Asia. Welcome, Dr. Majid. Eliza Niewiadomska, she's a senior counsel at the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She is responsible for regulatory advice on digital transformation of government commercial and leads technical cooperation under the EBRD UN Central Initiative established in 2011. Welcome, Eliza. Happy to have you with us today. And Caroline Nicholas, she is an independent expert in technical assistance, public procurement expert, law and policy. She led the work of UN Central in reforming its model law of 2011. She provides legislative and policy advice to national governments in all regions and works with many international bodies on governance, strategy, and public procurement policy and practice. So you are all welcome on our webinar, on our platform exchange today. So to start the discussion, because I know that many of you are waiting the insights we are bringing into today's webinar. So I will address my first question to Caroline. if you want to go to the foundation of the term emergency procurement, how can we define it? What is emergency procurement? This term has emerged, and if you want to base ourselves into the UNCTRAL and other international regulation, how addressing emergency procurement from a legal and regulatory point of view, especially in a country like ours where there were no martial law declared and regular law were applied. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bashma, and thank you to you and to Lamia for your kind words. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I've been working, as you say, with Lebanon for a while, and it's great to be able to tackle this really important subject along with my friends and colleagues Majed and Eliza, and we'll be talking, I hope, saying very similar things. I'm going to share some slides just to help people to follow as I'm talking. I'll just talk for 5 or 6 minutes on this because time is fairly short, and point you to some resources that might be helpful for you. So let me just make sure I can share this correctly. Okay, so I'm going to share and put this into a slide format, and you should now. Are you seeing the first slide? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for your first question. It's exactly the right one. What is emergency procurement? And you mentioned the guidance and the decrees and so on that your government has issued, and they don't define emergency procurement. And it's actually not that straightforward because your law says emergency situations are cases of imminent danger and disasters declared as such by the law. Okay. Well, that's very helpful. It's clear that something that becomes urgent because you haven't planned is not falling within that. But within emergency sort of situations, what do we mean? Well, clearly there's a threat to life, threat to the environment. You were talking about bombarding and bombing of infrastructure and so on. Or also if there might be, if delaying responses could make things even worse. But let's just say that there has been physical damage to infrastructure for whatever reason, and it needs to be addressed. That's not a simple yes or no situation. And the UNCTRAL model law to which you referred has a guide to enactment, and you can see there's a reference, a link to it at the bottom of the screen, and I'll put in the chat in a minute where you find that. When there's critical infrastructure destroyed, what might you need? Water, medical supplies, replacement shelter, food. You'll need that straight away. You need an immediate response. That's level 1, reactive procurement. There's a threat to everybody's lives. They need somewhere to stay. They need medical help. They need food and water. That needs an immediate reactive response. That situation, you're not going to rebuild in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, you'll be needing the same sort of things, but not in the same time frame. And that requires what I will call disaster relief, an emergency type procurement, but it doesn't need to be delivered that afternoon. And then, as you see on the slide, level 3, post-disaster reconstruction. That's an accelerated procurement because that's going to be urgent. So those are types of emergencies. Now, you don't have that level of detail in your law. It wouldn't be appropriate to put it in the law. The guide to enactment that accompanies the model law has that. And it explains in the same way as your Article 42 does, that the procuring entity must always, there's no exception, must seek to raise competition to the maximum extent practicable when not using open tendering. So what does that mean? When you look at levels 1, 2, and 3, your law correctly says that you have to maximize competition. So if you're looking at delivery of water in 3 months' time, you don't need single source procurement for that. You may not need single source procurement for that. So those are the sorts of questions you have to get from a legal and regulatory perspective that your procurement officials are thinking about. I've put on the bottom here useful resources The New Zealand government has a very simple, it's called a quick guide to emergency procurement, and it takes you through, not based on the UNCITRAL model, but the sorts of decisions. It's a very short document, it's just a few pages, very helpful. And as I say, the UNCITRAL model law and the guide to enactment talks about this. So let's just see what that means in practice. When you're in that level 1, reactive procurement, you then need direct contracting. There isn't time to engage in other methods of procurement. Your law seems to allow negotiations with a single bidder. It doesn't bar them. But clearly there's not going to be a written contract, and we'll come back to that a bit later on. But because that is the least secure, the least transparent, the least competitive, and the least open method of procurement, you want to limit that to the amount that you really need immediately. So that should be a limitation. And then when you move to the second level, a little while later, you have, as you mentioned, the shopping, and Article 60, the procedure, at least 2 offers, but there doesn't seem to be negotiations allowed here. So what's being envisaged there is